Hi there, my name's Jonathan M.S. Pearce and this is Pearced Off, a counter-apologetics segment for Skepticule Podcast. Today I'm going to speak to you briefly about hell and about how hell is an incoherent concept. I'm going to basically elucidate an argument that Ray Bradley used against William Lane Craig in a debate with him, and that is as follows. Imagine world W1. So this world, it's full of two sorts of people. Subset X of people are people who come to freely love God. And the key concept here is they freely come to love God. Subset Y are the people in the world who freely reject God. And as such, God sends subset Y to hell. So we have a situation where in World 1, God would know before creating World 1 that X would freely love him and go to heaven, and Y would freely reject him and go to hell. So therefore, God has two choices here which would invalidate the necessity to create hell. In other words, God would not need to create in order to send people to hell and suffer eternally. Choice 1 is God could take subset X, so these are the people that freely come to love God. He could take that subset of people and create World 2. In World 2, he neglects to create subset Y, the people that go to hell, and just creates a world where people would freely come to love him. Now, because he already knows in advance, he knows all the counterfactuals, so he knows that they would come to love him. He would just know that these people would freely love him and no one would freely reject him in such a world. Now this seems to me a pretty cut and dry argument against God creating hell. William Lane Craig in the debate used this as his comeback. So he said, but hang on, although it seems logically possible that God can do this, it's actually unfeasible. It must be unfeasible, which is invalidating God's omnipotence. So we have an issue with who God is here. What he means by this is that in World 2, being that it's now a different world because it's only got subset X, the people that freely come to love God, it might be then in this slightly different world with slightly different counterfactuals that some of those subset of X might actually reject God. So God would then have to take the subset of people in World 2 that love him and put them in World 3, but maybe in World 3 some of those people would freely reject him, and this goes on until there's no one left. So Craig seems to argue that it's unfeasible that God can create any world where all of the people freely love God. Of course, this means that God, although it seems logically possible, God is not able to do this, which is negating his omnipotence. And it seems a really ad hoc kind of defense to separate unfeasibility from logically impossible. I'm not sure that even makes sense, that distinction. But B, that God couldn't create a world where everyone freely came to love him. But I think an even more damning critique of Craig's position is this. We go back to World 1, where we have a subset X of people that freely come to love God, and we have the subset Y of people that freely reject God. Now God knows in World 1, let's assume that this is this very world that we live in, this very world, where there's a group of people that will come to love God and a group of people that reject him. God would freely know in advance of creating this world that X would come to love him and Y would reject him. He knows that already now. He knows the amount of people, the number of people in this world that will go to hell and the number that will go to heaven. He knows that in advance. So why bother creating this world at all, World 1? Why not just take that subset X, the people that freely come to love him, don't bother placing them in another world. He just knows conceptually that these people would come to love him. So therefore he doesn't need to test them out or anything. He just takes those people, doesn't create the world, and just creates heaven. God just creates a big party for subset X of people that would freely come to love him, and he neglects to create subset Y. There is no need to create people just to punish them. He knows in this world the people that would freely come to love him, so therefore why does he not just create them in heaven? It seems like creation, for some reason, God needs to create people in order to send them to hell. But clearly, he doesn't need to do that. So the argument here would be why either God can create a world where all people freely love him, which Craig says is unfeasible, but he needs to show that that is a coherent notion, or God can simply not create any world because he knows all the counterfactuals and he just chooses to create the people that he knows would freely love him in a given world and create them in heaven without creating the people who would freely neglect him or reject him, sorry. So that is this week's nice and quick counter-apologetic segment discussing hell and why it makes no sense. As ever, question everything and check out my blog, A Tippling Philosopher. Thanks for listening.